Countess Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the history of Magic the Gathering, where I go set by set, release product by release product that Wizards of the Coast has put out, explaining to you some information about it, important cards, everything you might want to know about this to help you understand both the history of Magic the Gathering and many of its cards and mechanics that maybe you want for some decks. Alright, let's begin talking about a new block and a new plane. Ravnica, the City of Guilds, or as it is popularly known as, Ravnica. This was the first set within the Ravnica block and was released on October 7th of 2005. Now it had the themes of guilds, enchantments, and hybrid mana, and had the keywords of convoke, dredge, radiance, and transmute. Now it had an incredible amount of multicolor theme to it. So there was a lot of multicolors cards, which we hadn't seen to this degree, of course, since back in Invasion and such. We also saw that this particular block, each of the various blocks, divided up between a number of guilds. Each of these guilds was represented by 2 mana colors. In this one, we saw 4 of these 2 mana colors to begin with. These cards that were associated with these guilds actually had the guild symbol as a sort of background on the text box of Magic cards. This did nothing to actually affect the card itself. This just told you this card was associated with this guild. So thematically, it's there because of this connection to the guild, but truthfully speaking, it's just there thematically. That's the only reason. It doesn't affect gameplay at all. It just might mean that if you wanted to build a specific guild's deck, you know what cards are associated with it. Now also did introduce the hybrid mana symbol, which we'll dive into a little bit later, but this is the place that it was introduced. We did see that the symbol on there represented a tower. It represents this because it represents the cityscape of course, Ravnica, which is a plane that is one massive city all across the world. Hence why we have it represented this way. This set was actually praised for the innovative guild format, that the entire block, people liked this idea that each of these pairs of colors were guilds and that you could play up to one of these guilds if you really wanted to. Now when it was sold, of course it was sold in 15 card boosters, a 75 card tournament deck, 4 pre-constructed decks, and a fat pack. All products, except for the booster packs, had a Pro Tour player's card in them. Now, the pre-release was on September 24th and 25th, and it featured a foil alternate art card version of Gleamcrawler. Now, it did have a release card, too, in Dimir Guildmage. Now, the set actually started with the name Ravnica, rather than Ravnica City of Guilds, but it was changed to add that City of Guilds title to it to represent the fact that the guilds were so important here, because we Wizards and the people wanted to focus on these guilds because they were as popular as they are, because tests showed they were popular. So when we focused on them with the product release, it drew people in. So the basic storyline of this set follows Agnes and the novel, which was released along with this, focuses on Agnes, this guard, basically, whose partner gets killed, and he's trying to figure out why. And it boils down to this plot that seems to be going on throughout the city of Ravnica, that he's getting himself involved in. Effectively, the city of Ravnica is built upon these 10 guilds, that 10,000 years ago they were at each other's throat, at war, possibly leading to destruction. Then this powerful guild pact was struck, a peace. Now it's 10,000 years later, and we're at the cusp of the anniversary. Each of these 10 guilds is represented by 2 mana in a combination of the 5 mana. Basically, if you take all 5 mana, you combine them, there is 10 combinations of colors between all of them, hence 10 guilds. So here we are, we got the anniversary, and something sinister is afoot. Alright, so as I said, it introduced the hybrid mana symbol. The hybrid mana symbol, if you would look at it, is actually a normal mana symbol circle, but it has a slash going through it. To one side, the top basically, you have 1/2 of a mana symbol. On the other half of this slide, the sort of bottom, you have the other half of a mana symbol. This represents that you could pay either of these mana symbols. So if top would be white, bottom would be green, it would mean you could pay white or green for this symbol. That means you could pay either of them. So it would maybe still have, of course, colorless mana cost. It might have more than one of these hybrid symbols, but for each of these symbols, it means you have a choice of 2 different mana for them. Another unique feature of the hybrid cards is the borders of the cards. One side would be the one color, and then it would bleed into the other side, which would be the other color. So in our example of the white and green, for the top being white, the left side of the card would be white, bottom being green, the right side would be green, and they would bleed into each other in the middle. This set also saw a large amount of Aura Matters cards, as much as had been back in the Urza's Block saga. That was one that had a lot back in the day. Along with artifacts, they focused a lot on auras back then. This one also did, though a lot of times it didn't state it directly. It had cards which encouraged you to use a lot of auras that, it basically set up in a very subtle way that you really wanted to use a lot of auras. Now, as I said, there are 10 guilds, and this set particularly has 4 of them. These 4 guilds, and any of the guilds that they had, each had their own keyword, and then each had their own number of legends. Let's talk about the keywords and the guilds that were part of this set. First was the Boros Legion, which was a red-white set. They had the ability Radiance. What Radiance is either on a creature or a spell, and when it would, whatever it was with Radiance, would target something, that creature, it would target every other creature that shared a color with it. That means if I have a Radiance ability on a creature or a spell and I target this white creature, I'm targeting all the white creatures. Now, it is very important to note that if the creature that I'm targeting is multicolor, it will target all the colors of that creature, because that creature is both green or white if it's green and white, or it's both red and black if it's red and black, and then it will affect all red and black creatures. House Dimir is a blue-black group, and their special ability is Transmute. If I have a card with Transmute in my hand, I may choose to pay its Transmute cost and discard it. Then I can search my library for a card with the same converted mana cost as the card I just transmuted and put it into my hand. Effectively, if I have a card that had a 5 converted mana cost, I pay its Transmute cost, I can get another 5 converted mana cost card from my library and put it into my hand to effectively replace it. It has to be the same converted mana cost. Now, the Golgari Swarm is black and green. Their special ability is Dredge. Now, Dredge, I have to choose to use it when a card with Dredge is in my graveyard. And when I would draw a card, instead, I can return that Dredge card to my hand, but I have to put a number of cards from the top of my library into my graveyard equal to the Dredge cost of that creature. So if it says Dredge 6, I'd have to return the card from my graveyard to my hand in place of a draw, and then put 6 cards from my library into my graveyard to replace it. And finally in this one was the Selesnya Conclave. This was a green-white grouping. Their ability was Convoke. What Convoke allowed you to do is, in replace of the normal mana cost of a spell, either replacing some or all of it, I could tap a number of creatures. Each of these creatures that I tapped would either produce a colorless mana in place of the mana that I would normally need to cast the spell, or a color of whatever that creature was. So if I tap a white creature, it could take up a colorless or a white mana for the spell with Convoke I'm attempting to cast. So this way, I could pay for part of the spell, or as I just said, I could pay for the entire spell if I have enough creatures to tap it. The Conclave oftentimes created a lot of tokens that made this a lot easier to do. Each of these guilds did focus a lot on the way these abilities worked, so they did work together well. Now, I'm going to go over something that's going to last the entire block. This means this information I'm going to go over will pertain to the other 2 sets within the Ravnica block, but it's important to talk about it now. I'm going to talk about the Megacycles. These Megacycles were the same for every guild. See? That's why it lasts across the block, because I'm only representing 4 guilds here. and I represent 3 guilds in each of the other 2 sets that are going to come out. So of course it's going to be the same, but I'm going to cover them now. And I will note in the videos about these other 2 sets that are part of this block that I've done this now, that I've talked about these Megacycles now. Let's talk about the 11 Basic Megacycles, which are one of each of these cards per guild. First off is the bounce lands. These were lands that would come into play tapped, and I would have to return a land I controlled to my hand when I played it. But when I would tap it, it would tap for 2 mana, 1 for each of the color mana from the guild. So it would be the red-white would tap for a red and a white at the same time when you tapped it. It had a cycle of guild halls throughout all the guilds. These were, of course, uncommon lands, non-basic once again, that tap for a colorless, or usually tapped for an ability that needed both colors of the guild itself in order to activate an ability that pertains to the guild itself. There was signets. These were common artifacts that for 1 mana and tapping it, you could add 1 mana of each of the 2 mana from the guild into play. So I would tap it, and I would add the guild's colors, basically. If it's the green-black guild, I get a green and a black for 1 colorless mana. So it did have a return that you would get 1 mana for 2. You just cycle 1 colorless mana into 2 mana of the proper guild. It had a cycle of shock lands. These were non-basic lands that did have the land types of the 2 colors it could produce. So for the example of the green-white one, it would be a forest and a plains, for anything that would count for forest and plains. That would specifically mention them and not mention basic or non-basic lands. They would come into play tapped unless you would pay 2 life. But again, if it counted as a forest, it counted as a forest. If it counted as a plain, it would count as a plain. And you could tap it for a green and a white. It had a cycle of guild masters, very powerful legends that would usually have an ability that pertained to the overall theme of the guild, that were the most powerful effects that could be related to that guild. There were also guild champions. These guild champions were another set of legends that oftentimes would do something, have an ability that would reward you when you're using spells of the colors of the guild. So if it was the black-green one, it rewards you for playing a black spell, or rewards you for playing a green spell. They had the guild mages, which would cost you 2 hybrid colored mana, of course, a hybrid between the 2 colors of the guild. Each of these guild mages would have 2 activate abilities, 1 for each color of the guild, which would have an ability that did, again, pertain to the guild as an overall. So effectively, I would have my guild mage out. I could pay for, again, for example, whatever the red one would be and whatever the white ability be. It had a cycle of guild artifacts. These were rare artifacts that had an activate ability of the 2 colors of the guild, of course. It had a cycle of common hybrid spells. These, of course, were common hybrid mana cost spells related to the guild itself, and a cycle of rare hybrid spells that again were related to the guild itself. There was a cycle of common gold cards. Basically, they were gold cards that related directly to the guild, that were the 2 colors of the guild. They had the guild's ability linked to them. So whatever the guild's ability would be on these gold cards. Now we're getting into 3 megacycles, which there are 2 examples at least per guild. There is the unbalanced gold cards. What this means is it costs you 3 colored mana and then any number of colorless depending on the spell, and it would be 2 of one of the guild's color, 1 of the other. So if we're talking about Celsnia Conclave, there'd be an example of a 2 white, 1 green one, an example of a 2 green, 1 white one. There's off-colored activated permanents. These were permanents of a color that the other color of the guild, they had an activated ability of that color. So again, if it's, let's say, it's a white card, and we're talking about Celsnia once again, it would have a green activated mana cost. Similarly, there was the allied boosting spells that would be of 1 color, for example, green, and it would have an ability that if you paid the mana cost with including mana of the other color of the guild as part of whatever colorless mana you would normally pay, then it would have an extra ability. So if I'm playing a green spell and it's part of Golgari, and I played black mana as part of that casting cost, replacing black mana as part of some of the colorless needed to be required, I would have an extra effect on this spell. Now, Ravnica had City of Guilds, had 2 cycles of its very own. It had come into play auras, basically auras that had an ability when they would come into play. It also had a cycle of hunted creatures. These were creatures that would be slightly better power, toughness, abilities than normal for their mana cost, but when they would come into play, an opponent would gain a number of tokens to basically balance this out. So this set had 6 reprints, including Dark Heart of the Woods. It had 1 functional reprint, Benevolent Ancestor for Alabaster Wall. It had 2 color shifted, including Char for Psionic Blast, and 13 strictly better, including Courier Hawk for Armored Pegasus. So the pre-constructed deck were, of course, a red one, white one called Charge of the Boros, a blue-black one called Demiri Intrigues, a green-black one called Golgari Death Creep, and a white-green one called Celsnia United. So each of them was themed after the various guilds. Alright, let's start talking about some of the cards from this set. There's Blazing Archon, a 5/6 flyer that creatures cannot attack you. So as long as you have this in play, nothing can attack you. There's Dark Confident. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library. Put that into your hand and then lose life equal to that card's converted mana cost. So you do get an extra card each turn, you just lose life in order to get it. There's Life from the Loam. Return 3 land cards from your graveyard to your hand, and it has Dredge 3. So it's a way of both getting lands back and putting lands into your graveyard, actually, in a way. Lightning Helix. Deals 3 damage to target creature or player, then you gain 3 life. Flame Fusillade. Until end of turn, permanents you control get tap this permanent. Deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Effectively, you make all your permanents be able to ping or burn something. Luxodon Hierarch. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 4 life. It's a 4/4. For a green and white and sacrificing it, you can regenerate each creature you control. Watchwolf. It is a 3/3 creature. It is unique because it costs you 1 green and 1 white to cast. So a 2 mana, 3/3. Simple as that. Really good though. Autochon Worm. It costs you 15 mana normally, but it has Convoke. It is a 9/14 Convoke Trample creature. Big, beefy, expensive unless you have a lot of token. Bloodborne March. When a player casts a creature spell, each player returns all creatures of that same name as the spell cast from their graveyard to the battlefield. So basically, it's great for if you have a lot of the same card in your deck, though it could affect other players too. If they have copies of the same card, you do. Bright Flame. It has Radiance. It is an X-cost spell that deals X damage to target creature, and then it radiates that it deals that X damage to each creature that shares a color with it. You gain life equal to the amount of damage dealt with Bright Flame. Chant of the Vitu-Gaze. This is a Convoke spell. Prevent all damage that would be dealt by creatures this turn. You gain life equal to the amount of damage that would be dealt. So I prevent damage and then I gain life. I like both Bright Flame and the Chant. They're both ones that I love to play because you do something and then gain life. The Radiate and gaining life on an X spell. Ooh, Bright Flame is one of my favorites, but the Chant is also great if you want to gain a lot of life after a big attack. There's Chord of the Calling. It has Convoke cost. It's an X cost spell that you search your library for a creature with a converted mana cost of X or less, put it into play, and then shuffle your library. So you get a creature from your library into your play, and you just would have to search for it. Chorus of the Conclave. It's a Forest Walk creature that has the ability that whenever you would play a creature as an additional cost to playing that creature, you may pay X. Basically, you can pay an additional X mana cost. For whatever that X would be, this creature would enter the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. So now, with this out in play, every creature that you play, you can choose to pay extra mana on it, and therefore it comes into play with +1/+1 counters. However much extra mana, the number of +1/+1 counters. Siru, Demiri Lobotomus. Whenever you play a blue spell, exile the top card of target library. Whenever you play a black spell, exile the top card of target library. Your opponents can't play spells with the same name as cards exiled with Siru Demiri Lobotomus. So effectively, the more spells you play, the more cards you exiled, the more cards your opponents can't play. They can't play them if it shares that name. We have concerted effort. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a creature with flying, all your creatures gain flying. So you just need one creature with flying, they all gain it. But concentrated effort doesn't end there. It also does the same with Fear, First Strike, Double Strike, Land Walk, Protection, Vigilance, and Trample. So any of those 8 abilities, if any of your creatures have them, at the beginning of your upkeep, all your creatures have them until end of turn. Basically, on your attack turn, when you be attacking, your creatures are buffed up with the abilities of all your creatures combined together. Copy enchantment. When it comes into play, it comes into play as a copy of target enchantment that is in play. Effectively, you pay this one, and you copy an enchantment. Dimir Cut Purse. When it deals combat damage to an opponent, that opponent discards a card. You draw a card. Doubling Season. One of the best cards in this set. Whenever one or more tokens would come into the battlefield, would come into play, you would put twice that many tokens onto the battlefield under your control. So effectively, you double the amount of token creatures you put into play. Similarly, whenever one or more tokens would be put on a permanent you control, you put double those amount of tokens onto that permanent you control. So the same way, you also double the amount of permanent tokens that are coming into +1/+1 counters or other types of counters. You get twice the creature tokens, twice the counters. Doubling Season is one of the best cards in this set. Dowsing Shaman. It is a creature that for 2 colorless and a green and tapping it, you can return an enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. Simple as that. It's a way of getting back enchantments. Flow of Ideas. You draw a card for each island you control. Another one that's pretty simple, but if you have a lot of islands, you get a big hand of cards. Followed Footsteps. It's an enchant creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, you put a token copy of enchanted creature into play under your control. So you enchant some kind of creature that you want a lot of copies of, and each turn, you get another copy of that creature. Gleamcrawler, 6/6 Trample, that at the end of your turn, you may return all creature cards put into the graveyard from play this turn to your hand. Glimpse the Unthinkable. Target player puts the top 10 cards of their library into his or her graveyard. Simple as that. It's a very mean, very dirty mill. Golgari Germination. Whenever a non-token creature you control is put into the graveyard, you get a 1/1 green sapling creature token. Your non-token creatures, they keep dying, you get token creatures. Of course, with Golgari, they could always come back and make more when they die again. Helldozer. It's a zombie. For 3 black mana tapping it, you may destroy target land. If that land was non-basic, you can untap Helldozer. So basically, if you destroy non-basic lands, you get to destroy more than one a turn. Basic, only one. Hex. Destroy 6 creatures. Simple as that. Just that. There you go. Destroy 6 creatures. Hour of Reckoning. It has Convoke. Destroy all non-token creatures. So if you're playing a token deck, wipe all the non-tokens out, and well, you're the only one left over with creatures. Junk Troller. It's a defender that you can tap it to put target card from a graveyard in the bottom of the owner's library. So not only could you theoretically remove key cards from an opponent's graveyard back into their library to keep them out from being in the graveyard where they might want them, you can also put cards back in your own library with Junk Troller. Light of Sanctum. Prevent all damage to creatures you control from sources of damage that you control. So effectively, if I would play a spell that would damage all creatures in play, my creatures do not take that damage. I'm protecting my creatures from my own sources of damage that might hurt everything. I keep my creatures alive while everything else dies. Master Warcraft. You may only play this before attackers are chosen as part of combat. So after combat has started, but before whatever attackers have been declared. You choose what creatures are attacking this turn. You also choose what creatures are defending this turn and how they are blocking. So, you effectively choose everything in combat, how it's going. Mind Leech Mass, a 6/6 Trample. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you reveal that player's hand. You may cast a non-land card from that player's hand without paying the mana cost. So if I hit someone with Mind Leech Mass, I basically look at their hand, and I get to cast one of the cards from their hand, for free. Whatever it is, I get to play it. Netherborn Phalanx. When Netherborn Phalanx enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life for each creature he or she controls. So I can play it, and if I'm playing someone with a token deck, well, they lose all their life. And it also does have a transmute of 1 colorless and 2 black. Nullmage Shepherd, a 2/4 elf. I can tap 4 creatures to destroy target artifact or enchantment. So I like it having an elf deck where I can have a number of elves and I can just tap 4 creatures to destroy artifacts and enchantments I don't want on the battlefield. There's Oathsworn Giant. It has Vigilance, and other creatures you control get +0/+2 and Vigilance, as long as it's in play. So it kind of replaces both Castle and it gives everything Vigilance. It's a very great defensive card for you to have. There's Primordial Sage. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you may draw a card. Great way that if you're playing a very creature-heavy deck, you get cards. There's Privileged Position. Other permanents you control have hexproof. They cannot be the target of spells or ability an opponent controls. If you have 2 privileged positions out, they protect each other. Everything you control has hexproof. Again, this is before hexproof was a keyword, so we're still going by the description I gave. But the ability has existed since this point in time, and 2 privileged positions, it gives it. Psychic Drain. Target player puts the top X cards of their library into their graveyard, you gain X life. You mill someone a bunch of cards, and then you gain life. Putrefy. Destroy target artifact or creature. It cannot be regenerated. So rather than usually what things you have artifacts and enchantments together, this is artifacts and creatures. You destroy one of them. Hey, there you go. Savra, Queen of the Golgari. Whenever you sacrifice a black creature, you may pay 2 life to have all other players sacrifice a creature. Whenever you sacrifice a green creature, you may gain 2 life. So if you sacrifice a black and a green creature, you gain the life, which you're going to be paying to have everyone else also sacrifice a creature. It has a lot of great combos, and it built around this fact that you can both gain life or force other people to sacrifice things. Selsnia Evangel. For 1, tapping it and tapping another untapped creature you control, you put a 1/1 green sapling creature token to play. Selsnia creates a lot of saplings. It is one of the easier ones to do it because it only costs you 1 mana and tapping 2 creatures. Selsnia Guildmage. This is another great one if you're creating tokens. For 3 colors and a green, you put a 1/1 green sapling creature token into play. Or, for 3 colors and a white, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Now, if you have 4 mana open, you can create a token. It's expensive in comparison to tapping 2 creatures with the Evangel, but if you have 8 mana open, you can create 2. 12 mana, you can create 3. So the more mana you have, the more tokens you can create a turn. Of course, you could also make your creatures a lot bigger. For 4 mana, you get everything +1/+1. 8 +2/+2. You can keep paying it. So there are some advantages with the Guildmage, too. Sisters of Stone Death. Now, the Sisters is one of my favorite cards. It's a very mean green and black one. For 1 green, you can force target creature to block Sisters of Stone Death as long as it is able to do so. So, if you're attacking with the Sisters, you can force certain creatures to block it. For a green and a black, you may exile target creature that is blocking or blocked by Sisters of Stone Death. So there you go. Not only could you force something to block Sisters of Stone Death, you could exile it. Or you could block with Sisters of Stone Death and exile something that way. You just pay mana to exile stuff with the Sisters of Stone Death as long as it's in that blocking blocked position. It's kind of mean there. But here's the kicker. The last ability they have. For 2 colors and a black, you may return a creature exiled with Sisters of Stone Death onto the battlefield under your control. Basically, you force things to be blocked by her, you exile them, and then you steal them. Or you block something coming at you, exile it, and then steal it. You steal creatures in the end with Sisters of Stone Death. Or you could just leave certain things exiled that you just don't want on the battlefield permanently. Sunforger. It's an equipment that has a equip cost of 3. It gives an equipped creature +4/+0. Now, for a white mana and a red mana, you can unequip Sunforger to search your library for a white or red instant with a converted mana cost of 4 or less, and then play it without paying its mana cost. There you go. You can use Sunforger as a way for search for instants and just play them. The fact is, it will cost you 5 mana to do this. But you can search your library for anything that's a white or red instant of 4 or less and just play it. That's it. Just play it. Sunforger is really good. And you didn't have to make its mana cost. That cost of equipping it and unequipping it is the mana cost of paying this. Sadok, Lord of Secrets. It's a 5/5 flyer that when it would deal combat damage to an opponent, instead, you may put that many +1/+1 counters on Sadok. Then, however many +1/+1 counters were put on Sadok, your opponent mills that many cards. So Sadok, he doesn't deal combat damage to opponents. He would hit them, he gets bigger, and your opponent's deck shrink. So the first time they lose 5 cards. The second time, when he's a 10/10, they would lose 10 cards. Then they would lose 20 cards. They expound the amounts. They get more and more cards. They're just being milled from the decks. The more times Sadok would deal damage to them. Thought Picker Witch. A colorless, sacrifice a creature. You may look at the top 2 cards of target's opponent's library, remove one of them from the game. So, you can just keep sacrificing creatures. Look at the top 2 cards and figure out, oh, they can keep this one. It's not very helpful. Exile that one, that's really great. Put that back on top. There's the card they're going to be drawing the next turn. And you can keep repeating this process, basically getting rid of the top cards that you don't want them getting from their deck. Just slowly picking them out and removing them from the game. It's not even milling them, it's exiling them. 3 Dreams. You search your library for 3 aura enchantments of different names, reveal them, and put them in your hand. Now, this means it does have to be 3 different auras, but you get to search your library for any 3 auras and just throw them into your hand. If you're playing a deck that has very good auras, or very themed to it, this is a great one for just grabbing a whole bunch that you could really use, throwing them in your hand, and then you're ready to use them. Twilight Drover. Whenever a token creature would die, would be put into the graveyard from play, put a +1/+1 counter on Twilight Drover. Twilight Drover just slowly gets bigger the more token creatures die. But that's not his only ability. For 2 colorless and a white, you may remove a +1/+1 counter from Twilight Drover, and put 2 1/1 white flying spirit tokens into play. Oh. So every time 1 token dies under your control, you can get 2. It's a little bit of mana, but you can constantly be doubling those dead tokens to get more and more tokens. Vijugazi, the City Tree. You can tap it for a colorless mana, or for 2 colorless, 1 white, 1 green, you can tap it to put a 1/1 green sapling creature token into play. It's yet another way that you can create saplings with Cessnia. This one is tokens with land. Not a bad one. If you have enough extra mana, you can just do it. It costs the exact same as the Guild Mage, but if you don't have the Guild Mage out, it's a great way of throwing a few out. And finally, Warped World. Each player shuffles each permanent he or she owns into their own library. Then, they reveal a number of cards equal to the number of permanents they shuffled into their library. Now, remember, this is permanents you own, not control. And it's also important to note that you could technically be shuffling tokens into your library. They just can't come back out. They cease to exist. Now, once you've revealed this number of cards, you take any artifacts, lands, and creatures from amongst them, these revealed cards, put them onto the battlefield. Each player will be doing this. Then, after those are out, you take any enchantments that they would have, put them into the battlefield. The remaining cards, instants, sorceries, planeswalkers, everything else, they get put in any order and put on the bottom of your library. Basically, you took everything you had in play, everything you owned in play, put it back into your library, and then just got a whole new set of things. The person that actually has tokens probably is at an advantage here because you warp world, And you lose a lot of tokens, but guess what? You get a lot of permanents out instead. Just a whole bunch of cards from your deck, because you're going to go through more of them. And in decks that maybe don't have a lot of instants or sorceries or even planeswalkers, this is a great one to throw a whole bunch of stuff out with. You create a bunch of tokens, they cease to exist, but hey, you just got loads of stuff more than your opponents. So, that's it for today. I introduce you to Ravnica, the City of Guilds. An interesting take on Magic, because we have the theme of two colors. Two colors at a time. And we split up these combination of two colors across this entire block. 4 of them right here. Red, white, blue, black, green, white, and of course, green, black. We theme it after these guilds in this setting. So these connections of colors have interesting and similar themes to their abilities. This was popular. And Ravnica still is popular today. The theme and the ideas of it are popular. We saw that Return to Ravnica was also a very popular set, a very popular block, because it continued the same themes of the Ravnica here and evolved it. So you can see how right here and right now, this important multicolor theme was established. Now it did introduce interesting abilities, which we don't hear these keyword abilities ever again, really. But they were interesting, and they fit within the guilds. And we did see something that they invented here, which has spread to other sets. Not an incredible amount of them, but hybrid mana has been shown in other blocks. Not only the 2 Ravnica blocks, it has been in other places, but it was introduced here. And we did see this resurgence of auras and multicolor, things that we didn't have a lot of in the past sets. We are now coming back almost around. Multicolor always has its loves, people that enjoy it a lot. The same can be said with auras. We haven't seen either of these for many sets to be a forefront, and here we are bringing them back around. Ravnica did everything right. Similar to how Mirrodin the block was very popular. We already are building a very popular block here. Again, it shows how poor Kamigawa, which I would say is not a terrible set, a confusing one to agree, but not terrible, was sandwiched between really good blocks. So of course it's remembered really poorly. It also didn't live up to Mirrodin before it, and now it's not living up to Ravnica. But Ravnica itself, getting back to that, had an interesting storyline about these 10 guilds and what's going on this 10,000th year anniversary. And we reflect it in seeing these 10 guilds. And a couple of the cards that are not within the guilds that revolve around it. It will be interesting to continue to talk about how it evolves over the course of the 3 sets within the block from this one. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please just leave it in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It's just for the channel, the empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon. Link description below. There are some great rewards there. It helps to grow and improve the channel and the empire. If you want to see some other great Magic the Gathering content, I can recommend my Friends of the Multiverse, Card Bazaar, They Said, We Said, and Tasty Snackies. They're great guys. They have been the first people in the Magic community to bring me into the rest of the Magic community, so I will always think of them as my favorites out of everyone. You know, if you're watching this one, you guys, that's the best thing I have to say about it. You're the 3 guys that brought me into the Magic the Gathering YouTube community as a whole. Thank you. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.